So today on Team Futurism, I'm joined by John from Godless Engineer. That's his YouTube channel. And I've been watching John's YouTube for, I don't know, maybe about a year now. I've got into the whole Jesus mythicism topic. It's been kind of part of my journey from just becoming, growing up as a Christian to becoming an atheist to still being interested in Christianity broadly because I'm just so aware of it. I've read the Bible several times. It's still culturally relevant all over the place. Whether it is a topic like Christian nationalism or in so many ways like Christianity, it's still kind of relevant. And just being, just continuing to read about it, I have kind of like slipped into this world of the Jesus mythicism topic. This is interesting to me because a little while ago, a couple months ago, I wrote an article for Merriam West called Jesus Mythicism is About to Go Mainstream. And I laid out some reasons there, and this is one thing I want to talk to you about today. About, is that true, for one? And also, I just want to talk about broadly the evolution of Christianity and how religion is kind of on the decline, but what that means culturally for the United States and for the world. But I do want to start out just by kind of like asking you about how you got into these topics and specifically the Jesus mythicism. And maybe you can even give a quick intro to what Jesus mythicism is.
Sure, no problem. So as far as like how I got interested into the topic, was back after I deconverted from Christianity and I was really engaging like in Facebook groups and stuff. I found myself in historical conversations about like Christianity's earliest origins and everything. And so I found myself on the historicist side because I was like, yeah, there was probably a guy. I mean, that's obvious. And so I got challenged on it, like, well, what evidence do you have for that? And I'm like, well, I mean, I don't know. And so generally what happens for me is, like I don't know something. So I go and I try to figure it out, like starting with just a simple Google search, and then I'll find books or I'll look more into the subject. And I eventually got turned on to David Fitzgerald's Nailed book. He presents a pretty convincing case in that, and he just provides like a kind of a brief overview of the scholarship at the time. And then, of course, that led me to Carrier's book, and Carrier has a whole bunch of recommendations for different books that you can read. And then, Carrier actually had 2 peer-reviewed books published sort of surrounding the topic. And so, I mean, I had a lot of stuff to consume. And, at the end of it, I just found myself not being convinced that Jesus was a historical figure. And and maybe we can get on into maybe later as to why I believe that, or why I'm still staunchly a mythicist now. But for those of you that don't know about mythicism, that's somebody that doesn't believe that Jesus, well, specifically Jesus mythicism, somebody that doesn't believe that Jesus was a historical figure, that this was a mythical figure that was sort of not really made up out of whole cloth, but rather was developed out of existing Jewish ideas. And so through the creation, or the not creation, but through the Hellenization of the of Judaism, they came up with this figure, this Messiah figure that had been sort of foretold in their scriptures, and basically just revolutionized Judaism into Christianity. And so there was no real historical figure that was at the center of Christianity. There's just these stories about this Messiah figure that did all these things. And in my opinion, that's what the evidence currently shows. As far as the evidence that we currently have, there are a number of counter arguments to it, but I feel like the explanations for these pieces of evidence are stronger on the mythicist side than the historicist side. And like one of the big ones is Paul's epistles. There's I believe 7 epistles that are considered by nearly all scholars to be written by the same person that we call Paul. And so he is our first indication of this Messiah Jesus figure. And it seems like, there's nothing in his work that actually puts him on earth. We only have a celestial figure of Jesus in that one. And then another big point is the fact that pre-Christian Jews actually came up with an archangel Messiah figure whose one of his names is Jesus. And they came up with this whole Messiah idea about how his death would absolve sins and all this other stuff, and that's completely separate. Like, that's a separate sect of Jews than Paul came from. And so it just seems like there was this movement to reinterpret scriptures and to provide this Messiah figure that would eventually become Jesus in Christianity. And so I couldn't find a good argument to suggest that Jesus was a historical figure. And so that's why I became a mythicist. That's why I started making videos about it. And that's why I continue to advocate on behalf of the position.
Excellent. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting to me because I can care less, whether Jesus lived or not at some basic level. I'm not invested in this because I think it's a good way to convince Christians to not be Christians,
Right.
or I have no ulterior motive here. I really don't. I just think that it's interesting. But when I published this piece in Merriam West, I got more hate than I've gotten from any article I've ever published. And I've published some political pieces that were warranting some pushback, right? But and this is, I guess religion is just such a hot topic. I got hate from Christians, obviously, but also from, in particular, some people in the atheist community. This guy, Tim something, I forget his name.
O'Neill?
Tim O'Neill, yeah, he runs a website, History for Atheists.
Yeah.
And so I want to throw this out there to you, is that, is this just a conspiracy theory? Is this flat Earth? Is this, that sort of a thing, like chemtrails? Or is this something different? And why is it different?
Well, I definitely don't consider it a conspiracy theory, obviously. I mean, I'm very much against conspiracy theories, but see, a main component about conspiracy theories is that you have this narrative that you want to tell. And so you'll twist information and you'll twist the facts and outright ignore other facts in order to construct your narrative. So generally, conspiracy theories will have a nugget of truth at the center of it, and then from that nugget of truth, you sort of branch out to your desired destination. But the problem with mythicism is that, just like you said, it's not my desired destination that Jesus not exists. Like, that has no value in my life, really. And you were saying that you tuned into my channel because of my mythicist content. You've been keeping up with it, but really that content does the worst performance wise on my channel, and I know that. So I have to sort of I've got to put out content like that in a very, I guess, calculated manner at times, just because of how YouTube's algorithm works. But it's one of the lowest viewed pieces of content on my channel, and so it's not advantageous for me necessarily to put out that kind of content. So there's no reason why I need this narrative to be true. And what it seems to me is that the whole conspiracy theory sort of aspect of it is really just rhetoric that has no teeth to it. Like, there's no, like, when you challenge people about why is this a conspiracy theory, they don't have good answers. Like, they can't explain it to you because it seems like they want it to be a conspiracy theory, right? Or they have a sort of weird idea about what mythicism is, because you do have a lot of crank mythicism that would be categorized as conspiracy theory, and typically that's really easy to sort of identify, because what you're going to find is you're going to find a lack of evidence, you're going to find a lack of source citation, you're going to find a lack of or not a lack, but you're going to find a lot of speculation. And so the thing with my position is minimal mythicism is that, you know, it's sourced in real academia. It's sourced in actual source material like manuscript evidence and just general information that we know to be true about like the first century or about, you know, Jews right around that time. It's sourced in all of that, and it's literally just taking all of the puzzle pieces that already exist and then putting them together and then filling in the blanks that haven't been explored yet. Whereas with conspiracy theories, like I'll just give you a for instance, like with the flat earth conspiracy theory, you have to literally ignore like evidence in the form of pictures, in the form of radiometric data. You've got to ignore like so many different fields of science in order to make the whole flat earth conspiracy thing work. And then you've got to postulate like, oh, there's this cabal of people that want to make you think that the earth is round for whatever reason. But that's not what the mythicist argument is saying. I mean, I would say that the use of consensus in New Testament studies is a problem, and that, you know, everybody appeals to the consensus, but the consensus is maintained by Christians. But that's a far cry from saying that, oh, there's world organizations that are dedicated to keeping, you know, Jesus a historical figure or something like that. I don't think that's it. I just think that religion has a pretty tight hold on a lot of people. And considering that this field has primarily religious scholars in it, it's going to take a lot to change their minds. I mean, mythicism right now is going through the same thing that, you know, the Old Testament went through when we figured out that the patriarchs there most likely were never historical,
right?
That these were constructed individuals. So in that particular situation, you had like years of people that were fighting against this idea, and you had like a lot of dirty stuff that went on in the academic world, like blacklisting people, firing people from positions. There was one particular person that couldn't even get a job in the field that he had a PhD in, and he had to like paint houses and like teach high school classes in order to make ends meet. So I mean, there's a real concern in New Testament studies about this kind of stuff, but as far as it being a conspiracy theory, there's just no teeth to that argument, and it's just rhetoric that's trying to make you stop thinking about the question of whether or not Jesus existed.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And you know, when I wrote this piece for Merriam West again, part of the reason why I wrote it was that you know, I was talking to my wife about this, and I was telling her, hey, like I think that you know, I've been reading about Jesus mythicism. I might almost be on board with it. And she rolled her eyes and she was like, wait, like no, duh, like obviously that's true. Of course Jesus was made up. And her background, and this to me is just fascinating because there are more and more people exactly like her. She grew up not knowing a single thing about religion, about Christianity or anything. She didn't know who Jesus was till she was like 12, you know, never even like had no idea that it was tied to like the virgin birth and just like nothing. Like even right now, you could ask her like, what was the virgin birth all about? She probably wouldn't be able to tell you, which to me is hilarious, you know. But the thing that's fascinating about that is that more and more people are going to grow up like her, right? And that just because, you know, even people now who say that they're Christian, I know a lot of people like this who say they're Christian, they don't own a Bible, they don't go to church, they just kind of like, it's just type of the thing that you do because like, yeah, I'm American, I'm Christian, you know, but they're not invested in anything. And a lot of those people, when they have children and then they don't take their children to school, to church, they're not indoctrinated in any sense, just to believe these stories or to be told that like, oh, of course Jesus was a real person. Like, how could you not, you know, if you're not grown up and told that, you might think, oh, you hear about this guy who like walked on water, he was, you know, virgin birth, he died and went up to heaven, you know, just floated up into the, of course he's mythological. I mean, that, how is that different from, you know, Poseidon or any other sort of god figure. And they're all mythological, so of course Jesus was, right? That seems like a pretty reasonable assumption. Again, just like harkening back to my wife, who like that was her assumption, and guaranteed she's representing more, not fewer people moving forward. What do you think is going to be? I mean, is that going to be like a growing default view in your perspective, or am I just like my sample size of one? Is it not representative? Do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that more and more people are growing up without religion and without being indoctrinated into it. I mean, I know I was indoctrinated into it, so I had no problem thinking about a dude walking on water, But I think the more that people grow up without being indoctrinated, I think that it'll be easier to dismiss this, the idea of the gospel Jesus. And I feel like that's where a little bit of the nuance comes in, because you'll have plenty of people that will say, "Oh yeah, definitely the Jesus in the gospel never existed." They'll say that, but then they'll follow it up with, "But there probably was really a guy that
Right.
everything was based on." But minimal mythicism, that position goes farther than that and says that well, there wasn't originally a guy there that all these stories were based off of. This was a gradual sort of creation of a Messiah figure out of pre-existing Jewish ideas. And so never was a historical person like walking around. And generally, in my experience, like a lot of people will be like, "Oh, well, there definitely was a guy that was walking around. He just wasn't magical."
Hmm.
And so that's why a lot of the conversations between atheists and Christians, they're not all that interesting. Like they're not too terribly
Hmm.
enlightening, because it's basically an atheist arguing against the magical Jesus. And
Right.
but plenty of people do that now. But the real discussion to be had is between a historicist who takes a more minimal historicist position and minimal mythicist, because both of them are arguing over the same thing, whether or not all of this is based off of a real human that walked around and gathered people and was teaching stuff. And so I think that as we head into the future, mythicism will become more mainstream with just the general public, I think. But as far as academia goes, I don't think it'll ever be a mainstream position.
Okay.
And that's primarily because of the fact that, like I said before, New Testament studies is primarily made up of Christians.
Hmm.
You even have Dr. Bart Ehrman, who is an agnostic, or he sometimes goes by atheist, but he's atheist agnostic um, professor. And he'll say he'll even say that he's in the minority of New Testament scholarship when he says that Jesus didn't historically rise from the dead.
Hmm.
Um, that is the mainstream position in New Testament studies, because most people in New Testament studies are going to be Christians, so they're going to believe that that was a historical fact that Jesus resurrected from the dead. So I think that New Testament studies will never be interested in the mythicist question, just by how they act and how important Jesus's very existence is to Christianity. Now, as far as like hundreds of years from now, maybe at some point they can move past it. They move past other things in their religion, so I don't know. Maybe they can, but
Hmm.
I think for the immediate future, as far as academia goes, mythicists will never be a mainstream position. But I think the general public will begin to accept it more and more, as time goes on.
I think that's what I believe too. And I mean, Bart Ehrman's an interesting case. I've read some of his books. I think his books are great. I really like the guy. I've listened to him on some podcasts, and I really like him. But it's interesting. One time he was talking to Michael Shermer, the Skeptic magazine guy, and Michael asked him about the mythicism question. And I wish they had talked more about it, because I think that Michael could be a person who could open this discussion in an interesting way. But Bart Ehrman, to me, in my mind, he kind of like showed his cards in that he said that I'm not ever going to go there because it turns Christians off from even engaging with a non-believer to even like entertain the idea that Jesus wasn't a real person. He says it's a non-starter to convert people. It's like, okay, well that's like that's you're that's the whole game. Like it clearly you're trying to deconvert people. Like I'm not. I don't care. I think people are going to be deconverted naturally just as demographics change. I'm not in the business of like trying to do that. So I think that like maybe the door to getting him to change his mind is to just, I mean, not that he needs to. I mean, I don't care. Like he can believe what he wants, but I think it's just to maybe get him to see that like this is an interesting topic just for the sake of I don't know, historical accuracy or just what we could learn culturally from this, anything like that. And not like everything isn't about the deconversion game. People are going to be deconverted. That's just like where we are at in history right now. Like people can Google shit if they're curious. You know what I mean? Like no one's going to believe, or fewer and fewer people are going to believe many of the tenets of Christianity in the future, just like no one believes that slavery is now okay, right? And that used to be like, oh, it's just a thing. Grown past it. We're going to grow past many more things in the Bible, I think. But I mean, I'm kind of curious. There's a question in there that I have for you, which is that like going back to Bart Ehrman, what are the repercussions for people becoming more accepting to this idea of Jesus mythicism? Do you think that it has a cultural harm baked in there of any sense of maybe one, it gets Christians more entrenched in their views, as Bart Ehrman might say, or do we need as a culture this belief that Jesus was a real person? It maybe a Jordan Peterson character would say that we need this mythology, to ground us in Western civilization. Do you think there's anything there, or are you think we should just move past the Jesus myth?
Well, I mean, I think that obviously I feel like the theology of Christianity, regardless of whether or not Jesus was a historical figure, I think that it's very toxic and abusive. I think that it causes people to tear themselves down. And then also, other people pushing the theology on them will teach them how to tear themselves down and to shame them and guilt them and everything like that. So I think that the theology of Christianity is ultimately a net negative. So for that reason, I would say that it's ultimately better emotionally, psychologically, and all that for people to move past Christianity. As far as the question of Jesus like existing in history, I don't want it. I don't want it to come off like I think that people need to move past that or people need to just accept it or whatever. I think that everybody can be perfectly fine and still think that Jesus existed in history, but I feel like if you're gonna care, like if you really want to know the truth of history, which is I would hope what most historians would want to know, I would hope that you would want to investigate that. And if you're an atheist and you've sat there and you've questioned whether or not God exists and you've come away unconvinced of that, I would hope that you would level the same kind of skepticism for Jesus's very existence, because the evidence for it is not as great as a lot of people would have you think, especially Bart Ehrman would have you think. And I feel like if you're gonna be unconvinced by God's existence, then you should probably investigate whether or not Jesus existed and apply the same quality of like expectations for evidence, or so you use the same quality of criteria for Jesus's existence that you do for accepting God's existence. And there's plenty of ways, plenty of criteria out there that we can apply to Jesus to see whether or not he existed. But the problem is that of course you've got religious scholars that are setting these criteria, and so a lot of people have I guess kind of skewed ways of viewing history in light of that. And so I do wish that more people would look into like the historicity of Jesus and all that. I wish that people like Bart Ehrman wouldn't make the topic so vitriolic. Because it's been the historicists that have really made this conversation over this topic so harsh at times, and receiving the kind of backlash like that you received. I don't think that there's really any need for that. I think that we can just have conversations about this stuff, and it's like no big deal. But yeah, I think that people need to investigate it, and I think that regardless of the topic, though, people need to try to move past Christianity just because of how toxically abusive it is.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that too. So I mean, in regard to someone like Jordan Peterson, I just bring it up because I mean, he's so topical on this topic half the time. But I mean, in a sense, I think he totally can and does do some good for people who just like maybe they need an intro into like a self-help world, right? And he can give some like okay self-help guides. Maybe someone needs that, and I'm totally okay with that. I really kind of do think where he gets more where I become uncomfortable with what he's saying. There are a lot of areas, but I think it's the Christian story, it's the Christian narrative that he's so obsessed with that leads him into some kind of potentially harmful views. And it's because when you look at the Christian narrative, I mean, it's a blood sacrifice based religion where the main godhead figure says, "Don't question me," and don't look into the world for answers, look to me for answers, all those sorts of things. The point of irritation with or the one of the points of departure for me with Christianity is that exact thing, where I think that the message fundamentally it's portrayed as this beautiful thing. It's really this ugly story. It's really like this horrible tyrannical figure, just as a literary figure. This is something that I've written about quite a bit. Is that just the in terms of the nuts and bolts of the story, it's such an easy way to go to say that Lucifer is more of the good guy in the story, because he's I know there's a lot here, but he's the light bringer. He's the one who says that yes, find your own answers and look to the world for answers. Don't look to this authoritarian figure, and in fact defy the authoritarian figure when they say these are the rules and I'm gonna kill you if you don't follow them, right? So I mean, the Lucifer figure is science. It's modernity. It's us, transcending the ancient stories of paranoia and ignorance, right? Do you have any thoughts on like that symbolism? I mean, do you have any? I mean, I really do enjoy Satanism. It's kind of like if I'm gonna like go with a storied ancient narrative, I resonate with that. Do you have any thoughts on Satanism or any of that mythology stuff that resonates with you?
Well, so as you were speaking, I was just thinking about how Abrahamic religions in general are very anti-knowledge, like from the get-go, and I think that whole aspect of it very much impedes like social and societal progress in general, and that's because you have various points in our history that you can look to where religion has tried to keep us like from progressing societally. One of the best examples that I can think of is Ben Franklin, I believe it was, who invented the lightning rod. He faced opposition from the religious people at the time because they felt like he was undermining God's will. Because when people would go and ring the church bells, on occasion somebody would get struck by lightning and killed. And so they thought that, well, that's what God wanted that person dead for whatever reason. And so by Franklin inventing the lightning rod, putting it up on churches and putting them up everywhere, it led to people not being struck by lightning. And so they were very much opposed to that very simple thing. And, it almost yeah, at very at some points in history, you can definitely see where religion is looking to uh, regress us, it just prevent us from moving forward. I mean, regression. I'm thinking about the repeal of Roe v. Wade, and how if the Republicans they gain traction in the government, they're gonna ban abortion all throughout the United States, which is gonna be horrible for everybody in the United States. And that's a regression. That's and they're doing this because of their religious ideology. That's the only reason why they want to do it. They can try to hide behind caring for the lives of children and everything like that, but blastocysts and fetuses are not children. They're not people. They're fetuses and blastocysts. And so you have religion looking to prevent or even regress society. And so in that way, I think that it's ultimately a net negative. That's why that's why typically I will also say that I'm an anti-theist, but not because I want to like bully religious people or I want to force religion out of society or anything. It's just because I feel that religion is a net negative on society. And as far as Jordan Peterson goes with the myths and stories,
Yeah,
and
let's
how
hear your
they
hot
can be,
takes. I want to get a Jordan Peterson hot take.
I mean, I feel like that has some kind of internal assumptions that are rather demeaning to people, because when I hear that, I hear Jordan Peterson saying that some people are just too stupid to think their way, through life. And so they need these mythologies or whatever to make them feel better or whatever. And you can go that route, but I feel like that's ultimately masking like what could be the issue, or it's really handicapping some people in leading a fulfilled life. Because I feel like if you need these myths and everything like that in order to get through the day, or in order to know right from wrong or whatever, I feel like you're sort of boxing yourself in a little bit from growing. Like there's no room to grow. If you have this mythology, you have this story, that's what the story is. And, until you're told otherwise, that's the story of, well, this is wrong because of this reason or whatever. It doesn't give you the option to really sort of flesh out why you think that it's right or wrong, or why, you think this is societally acceptable. Like, I feel like if you allow people, or you teach people how to think, through these things, they can be, a little bit more fulfilled in life. But Jordan Peterson seems to think that a good number of people are just too stupid to do that. And I mean, with the word salad that he puts out, I mean, I feel like the people that he's speaking to and that he's definitely targeting are the ones that are believing in him. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's not a bad assumption. I'm not going to sit here and call anybody stupid for like following Jordan Peterson on those particular topics, but I feel like I just feel like Jordan Peterson assumes that a lot of people are stupid, and that's the reason why they need those myths. And I totally reject that whole assumption that some people are just too stupid to be able to critically think.
That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, to me, I would just be so depressed and disappointed in humanity if we couldn't at some level healthily move past these ancient myths and have new myths, or new anything, new ways of having these these conversations. My wife and I always talk about the purpose of life, the meaning of life, these sorts of things, because we have very different views on it just from the way we've been brought up. And she always says there is no meaning to life. Life is purposeless. That's always kind of like rubbed me in a weird way. But recently together we read, or not together, but it happened to be at the same time. We read the French philosopher Emile Chiron, and he has this book, The Trouble with Being Born. And it's so fascinating because he's a nihilist who's life has no meaning, this sort of a thing. And the way he articulates it, it's funny. It's very humorous. Like he's doing these little takes that all of a sudden, like, you'll be like, oh, profound, this is so profound, and then like you'll just start cracking up. And he's able to find this humor and this wonder and this glory and the purposelessness of life in a way that, I mean, it was novel to me. I barely even knew that existed, and I love, the humor of life. That's one thing I just like always rant about. But to see that in the purposelessness of life, that's a story, right? That's a narrative that we're never told, and that I feel like a Jordan Peterson or Bible believing type of person would want to hide everyone from, because, oh my God, like it's all dark and gloom and you're gonna kill yourself and you're depressed and you need antidepressants if you have any sort of like this in your brain. Meanwhile, like, I don't know, I'm not like married to Emil Cherone or anything. I've only read a book or two by him, but it's like amazing. It's like, why haven't I read this my whole life and just had these thoughts in my brain of an alternative way to approach this topic of purpose and meaning? There's a lot there, but like I do kind of want to ask you like more of like a, I don't know, a basic question that like Sam Harris always gets asked on this topic, which is that as we move away from religion, we have historically lowest church attendance ever, the lowest, I mean, the rise of the nuns, right? More and more people saying they have no religion. Do you worry about community, how we're losing community because of that? Like practical day-to-day friendships are being impacted, or institutions like marriage, or these sorts of things. Does that trouble you at all? Or do you have any thoughts about that topic?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest things that like the atheist community in general has trouble with, that, religious communities seem to be able to do a little bit better, and that's, community.
Hmm.
It's often said that the atheist community is a lot like herding cats, because, everybody's going their own way and all this other stuff. But I mean, I feel like that harkens back to the whole, meaning in life and everything like that. Because if you're talking about, absolute meaning or transcendent meaning, then I would agree that there is no meaning. But the one thing that connects like in the theology of Christianity, at least, and their whole communal, the whole communal aspect of church, what you have is is this idea that, you're supposed to praise God. Like that's the entire that's the meaning to life that Christianity gives, is that you're supposed
Right.
to do everything with God first in mind. You're supposed to do everything for God. If what you're doing doesn't glorify God, then you don't need to do it anymore. And it seems to be a really simple way, but it's one way that, they're connected through community.
Hmm.
And I think that as we move past religion, I think that we'll just see different kinds of communities, popping up. I mean, we already kind of see that now. Like, you've got school communities, where, you've got parents and parent teacher associations, you've got kids in different organizations in school and everything. And so, there's a communal aspect to that. And I think that, for adults that are not like in school or anything like that, you're going to have, different, other than church, you're going to have different communities. And even right now, like I'm a member of several different communities online. While I don't have any like, I guess, physical community around me, just because of, we're not really, I guess, active all that much, like because of our liberal position in a very red state.
You're in
Um,
Alabama, I believe, right?
yes,
Yeah.
I'm in North Alabama.
A lot of
Uh,
blasphemy you're dropping today for
yeah.
an Alabama.
But I think that we'll eventually develop like new communities. We'll
Mhm.
have different kinds of communities that are not necessarily religious based, but that, they could be one thing or another. I know, like the Magic the Gathering is a game that I
Mhm.
play. I haven't played it in a while, but Magic the Gathering has a pretty big community out there, where people will go to a card store, and whenever a new set is released, they'll go to a card store and they'll play games with each other, and they'll it's all very cordial and friendly. I've been to a few events, and it's a nice little community. And so I think that communities like that will grow. Well, another good example is like D&D communities.
Mhm.
Those are getting popular. Or, well, I've never been into D&D, so I don't know how popular they have been like in the past or whatnot, but I've been noticing them more. And so like
Mhm.
that's a whole other community. And then you've got, communities that pop up at work. So I just think that, as church communities, start to disappear, I think that we'll just have different kinds of communities
Mhm.
that pop up.
That makes sense to me because I mean, people make fun of online communities as if it's not real, but I mean, I've met a lot of great friends from that started out as Twitter conversations, and then we join a meetup, and then I've met some genuinely really close friends that way. Also, I do think that my 2 cents on church is that there's a lot of toxicness that happens at church. And a lot of the relationships that I mean I remember personally totally overrated, like very superficial and very just overrated. When I was a kid growing up, most of my close relationships were in sports or school or you know definitely disparate from like the church community. Even though I was like very involved in it, I would so much have rather any day of the week hung out with someone from my sports community than my church community, and definitely made those choices all the time. um but do you think, I mean, humans do have this drive at some level to have some sort of a religious communion or religious thoughts, religious something. And there's a lot of noise made now about like wokeness is becoming a religion, right? Or like anything can be turned into a religion-esque. Do you think that we need a replacement religion? Do you think wokeness is a religion or can be? I mean, that's a pejorative, obviously, but
Mhm.
I mean, what do you have any thoughts about that? Of like, we just will create a replacement just because that's what we do, or not?
Well, I mean, I think that I think it really depends on how you define religion, because if you think about religion as like a set of beliefs that are dogmatically held, and there's some kind of
Mm,
organization centered around it or whatnot. I think that naturally people form those kinds of sort of organizations, at least. um, and I think that if we were to move past religion, I mean, I mean, we currently form these kinds of organizations congruently with religion now. You've got like there's at least down here in the South, there's this thing called the Elks Lodge. It's like a whole organization that's I guess secular. Maybe I don't really know that much about it. I'm just know my stepfather's part of it. But like you have these kinds of organizations that people already make, and so without church there, I just think that other organizations will probably pop up and serve some of the same things. Now, if you mean by religion as in like like a dogmatic position or dogmatically adhering to certain ideas, I think you can do that with anything. I
right.
think that you can dogmatically hold to, liberal ideas, just like you can dogmatically hold to more conservative ideas.
Hmm.
I think the conservative ideas right now are a lot more dangerous for society than the leftist ideas or the liberal ideas. But I think that you can be dogmatic in both positions and not be open to changing your mind. I think that an important aspect of us moving forward, from religion or moving forward in general, is to not be dogmatic about things. Like, I'm not dogmatic about mythicism. I'm
Hmm.
more than open for people um, to show me that mythicism is wrong. I haven't found that yet, but I'm totally open to the idea. And so that's why I look for videos. I try to find people that are arguing for the historicist side, and because I if I'm wrong, I want to know about it. And I think that uh, more people need to be in that kind of mindset of like, well, if I'm wrong about this, then I want to know. And I find that everybody for just about every position can be dogmatic and hold to their idea, even if somebody provides them with a good reason not to believe something. And I think that is going to be that's a whole separate problem, but it's also kind of entangled with these religious ideas because people dogmatically hold to religious ideas. But I think the dogmatism itself is also another problem that we kind of need to move past.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that there are whole countries, whole societies that have next to no religion in them. I mean, China's like a godless state. A lot of the Nordic countries are pretty godless through and through. I haven't, I don't know specifically about what they do to replace, if at all, religion. I've no idea. But America is weird because we are so, I guess it's part of just like the way we're indoctrinated about Americanism that we think that we're a very religious country, and so we just kind of like run with that, which is interesting. But I mean, I agree with you just in terms of whenever there is any sort of radicalization, whether it's to the left or to the right, whether it's religious extremism or like atheism, extremism, whatever that might be, I'm so much more worried about the right wing and the ultra conservative and ultra Christian or religious folks. They just seem to do more harm to society, like writ large. And I'm like, as a liberal person, I'm so ready to like list all the ways that I think that like wokeism can be kind of toxic, or liberals can be kind of crazy and they can ignore things that are convenient, and on and on. Liberals are people, they do a lot of dumb things, but I'm like scared of like conservative radicals. Christian nationalists are like the group, if any, that I would put my money on to like destroy our democracy, right? If enough of them just like rose up and did what they wanted to do, that would be the end of American democracy. And they've said this publicly. Marjorie Taylor Greene or a couple of these folks think that we should be a Christian nation again. I mean, that's ending democracy. That's ending the core of what our country is, let alone the whole, stop the steal thing. All these things, like they're kind of terrifying. They're legitimately kind of scary. I mean, do you think that there's any way for us to get past that, where we don't have any, like, maybe we can have some extremes, but we don't have any scary extremes? I don't know any Christian nationalists myself, but I'm in California. You don't have to drive too far out of any city before you see stop the steal stuff, Trump 2024, like very radical. Here we have a movement called the Jefferson Country or Jefferson Movement, whatever it's called, where it's like Idaho and Northern California and Montana, a couple of these states, Nevada maybe, I don't even know. They want to like merge together and have their own like mega red state, because like the corners of all these states, they're all super red, right? Even though California's blue, but like actually it's kind of not. And that's like worrisome. There's all just like scary things. Scary in that like I'm not actually scared of it, because I don't think these people will ever get that much power. But I mean, do you have any thoughts about like how to move past that, how to reach these people, anything like that? I mean, you interact with people that I would consider like scary right wingers probably way more often, just being in Alabama. Everyone's a person. I think we're all wonderful. I grew up super conservative and Christian again, so I feel like I can relate to anyone. But yeah, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, like reaching these people, or just like sanding down the scary edges of the Christian nationalists?
Well, the first and foremost thing that people can do, obviously, is vote, and not vote for Christian nationalists.
Right.
A lot of people out there are single issue voters, so like they'll vote Republican even if it's just for like maybe you don't like inflation, and so the Republicans promise that they're going to reduce inflation, which I don't know. Nobody's come up with a good way of how that's going to actually happen as far as like the Republicans go. Yeah. So I don't know how they're going to do that. But let's say that that's your single issue, and so you want to vote Republican. Well, the problem is that this the midterms that are coming up in this month, November, and the 2024 elections are incredibly important, because if you care at all about like women, the LGBTQ community, or people of color in general, like all those minorities, like if you care about any of them, I would highly suggest not voting Republican. Even, I'm not saying that you have to become a Democrat or a liberal even, but not voting for Christian nationalists is going to be the resounding message that we have to send.
Yeah.
Because they've been emboldened by people that are supporting them. They've been emboldened at the polls by people that are voting for them, even though they're sitting up there saying, like, my three things are Jesus, guns, and babies.
Right.
There was I believe that was a candidate from Georgia who didn't actually win her nomination, but still, there are plenty of people out there that are doing exactly that. Who are making their entire platform about their Christian position, and that they could have some reasonable positions on different things, but the fact that they're looking to push Christianity through the government, I think, should automatically invalidate their candidacy for anybody that's looking to vote.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know that some people might not like voting for the Democrats, but at least the Democrats aren't going to instill a Christian theocracy, which is what the ultra conservative, the MAGA Republicans, that's what they want to do, and that's what they will do their best to do if they're given power. Yeah. And so I think the best way to combat it, number one, is by voting. Number two is by people not being afraid to push back. Like, like me on Twitter or on Facebook or anywhere else on social media, like arguing against a Republican is not going to do anything. Like, they're either, going to just entrench themselves more in their position, or they're just going to block me, or they're not going to listen to me, or whatever. But if you have people that are in their lives that are pushing back against them and calling them out, on the things that they're saying, I think that can have a lot more impact. Like, I was recently on a work trip, actually out to Barstow, California, and there was a guy there that was talking about how, the pandemic's over because Biden says so. And so I'm like, well, that's not exactly true, because, it's becoming endemic, much like the flu. And he's like, well, that's not what Biden says. I'm like, I don't really care what Biden said. I'm trying to explain to you, like, what he was trying to communicate. Yeah. And, of course, he was not having it. But the point is that even that little bit of a pushback, like if you think about doing that every time somebody says something, like your crazy right-wing uncle or something like that, if you just calmly explain the position and you keep pushing it, I think much like the the religious discussion of an atheist talking to a religious family member or something like that, constantly pushing back and explaining your position, explaining why either that's not true or this isn't true or this is true and that person's wrong. Like, having those kind of conversations, I think, can really do wonders for changing someone's position. It's definitely people's positions are not going to be changed by mean people on the internet. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I mean, I just voted today, so it's kind of on my mind. But I always make a point every time I vote to like look up the Republicans. And because a lot of times the Democrats, especially in California, are just incompetent, or maybe they're embroiled in controversy, or like, I kind of want just a competent person at some basic level, especially if it's a complicated thing and I don't understand all the policy issues, Secretary of State, or I don't even know what that person does, right? At some level. I'll look up the Republican. And I think I voted for one this time, actually. I forget what it was, but I just will not vote. I will just completely tune out if it's a Republican who is, one, a Christian nationalist at all, or two, like into Trump at all. And it's just because I think that they've just lost touch with reality. And I mean, this is the futurist podcast. I like to talk about futurism. I also like to think about like where is the world going and how do we get there? Because I just think, things that we've tried before, a lot of it just doesn't work. And so why are we keep trying it? Why are we still doing it? Let's just try new shit. Even if the new shit doesn't necessarily work out, we tried it, gained knowledge, we can move on from there. That's just kind of my political philosophy, like part of it. It's just so interesting to me how people are just so into, just like literally losing track with reality and just like actually not part of reality anymore, like in this specific voting cycle. And for me, like the easy way to like check for that is, are you Christian nationalist or are you a Trumper? Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, I don't see our country quickly moving forward politically at all. I think that like a lot of just progress is just demographic changes. And that's why I like to talk about, just people demographically are going to be less Christian. Maybe they'll be more into mythicism, that sort of thing. Because I mean, I just think that like a lot of change is going to kind of happen slowly. We did have some radical changes in the last couple decades, which I think is awesome, like gay marriage voting and certain things like that. But like, look how easy it is to turn back, like with Roe v. Wade just gets turned back. And it's because like older generations just vote. I mean, like you said, I think that we just need younger generations to vote, and slowly they will be, become the new generation of voters. But I'm a little bleak on like the political future of America at the moment. Are you bleak about it at all, or are you optimistic that things are going to get better?
Well, I'm holding my judgment right now until after after these midterm elections in 2022 here, and primarily because if we see massive Republican and Christian nationalist turnout to where it overwhelms the Democrats and those that are voting liberal, then that's going to set the tone for the future of America. But if we see the Republicans getting shut out at the polls, there being like massive support for anybody but these Christian nationalist Republicans, that's going to send a huge message to them, so that maybe they'll tone down their whole Christian nationalist rhetoric. Maybe they'll change their tune. And I think that if it just really depends on these midterm elections. So I'm hopeful that people won't vote, like massive amounts of people won't vote for the Christian nationalists that are up for election this year. But I guess I'm just I'm watching the train go and hoping that there's not a wreck. And we're coming up on the turn where there could be a wreck. If there is a wreck, I won't be able to stop watching it, because it's just going to be a horrible wreck. But if we can navigate that turn, I think we'll be fine. It's all about sending the right message, and the right message right now is to reject Christian nationalism. But you've got so many people out there that are still indoctrinating their kids into like the horrible ways of our past. I mean, just this past Halloween, I was perusing Twitter, and there was a group of teenagers where they were dressed in blackface in like the black and white jail uniforms and had somebody as a cop. And like,
whoa, that's that's a little shocking.
Yeah, that's some really like old understanding of everything, and obviously like that entire persona was taught to these kids.
Yeah, they missed the memo from like 2008. I mean,
yeah. And so I mean, you're still gonna have people out there that are pushing, for that kind of for being unapologetically racist and misogynistic and all this other stuff. But I think that if we can send a resounding message about Christian nationalism, about racism, about I know a lot of people might feel like it's reaching to say it, but Nazism. I mean, we're seeing there's way more Nazism in America than I'm really comfortable with. Like it's kind of hard to say that that's not a major trend when it seems like at every single like Republican rally or Republican get together or whatnot, that there's like a Nazi flag there. Like there's at least one Nazi flag at every single Trump rally and every single like Christian nationalist rally that I've seen. And so it's just, I feel like we just need to send a resounding message about it. And if we don't, then, that's going to be bad news for America.
Yeah, well said. I totally agree. Well, to wrap things up and to kind of bring it back around, I do want to give a shout out to Richard Carrier. You mentioned him earlier, but he's the guy that I think if you are listening to this and you think Jesus mythicism sounds interesting but stupid, he's the person that I would probably recommend to like watch some of his videos where he lays out his thesis. It's so much more like reasonable than I would have guessed, for just a couple years ago before I really dipped into this topic. It's quite reasonable. I also want to recommend the Godless Engineer YouTube channel. It's fantastic and a lot of fun to listen to. And I'm curious if there's anybody that you would recommend people check out to, maybe dip their toes into the Jesus mythicism topic.
Well, David Fitzgerald is always a good resource. He's got some nice short books on Jesus mythicism. I actually did the cover art for his Jesus Mything in Action
Really?
series.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, who is it? John C. or Smalley, David C. Smalley. He always talks about that book. I think he did the audio for it.
Yeah.
I believe. Yeah, I haven't read it, but I've meant to.
Yeah, it's a really good book series, and that's for somebody that doesn't that maybe is not ready to get into like all of the real, I guess, nerdy biblical stuff about it. There's that. I also have an app on the app stores called Chrestus. That's Chrestus. That is if you don't want to spend like the money on both of Carrier or a lot of Carrier's books just yet, you can get like a brief sort of summary overview in the app. Cool. And it's supported by like a lot of scholarship. I try to make sure I have the best information in it. So you can find that on whatever app store you're on. But there's let's see who else. The Myth Vision channel. They do lean historicist. Derek does, at least, and but I mean he does try to have like both sides of the argument well presented. And
yeah, I like him too.
Yeah, honestly, the best thing that I can say is that if you're looking to dip your toes into this, a good thing that I've found is listening to debates, because what you'll have both sides represented. And so you can hear the back and forth and you can kind of judge for yourself, like who's got the better argument, who's making a better case. And I wouldn't listen to every single mythicist out there, because there are crank mythicists out there. There are mythicists that, don't use the best scholarly position available. Yeah. But if you listen to people like Dr. Carrier, when he debates, he's got a lot of debates out there. He's got a lot of discussions on this topic that you can hear. And then, of course, there's, lectures by Carrier or Fitzgerald trying to think if there's anybody else that's really lecturing or
there's a Price,
discussing
right? Price.
Well, Price is, I mean, he's a little problematic in multiple ways, but
okay, I haven't followed him at all, but I know his name.
Yeah, he's a little problematic, so I wouldn't necessarily I wouldn't necessarily go to Price for it. He does have a degree that's relevant to the question, so like, if you want to check out some of his books, that might be okay. But I would pretty much just stay on the mythicism topic as far as Price goes.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, those are the best sources that you got that people can go to, that can consult. I know Carrier has a blog that he writes on, at least I want to say 3 to 4 times a month. But he covers, mythicism. He covers, atheism. He covers just religious claims in general. So it's a generally good blog to keep up with. So I mean, those would be the resources that I would point people to.
Excellent. That's great. Yeah, something I need to check out myself. Well, thanks, John, for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. And it was a pleasure speaking.
Oh, thank you for having me on here. I'm always excited to talk about mythicism and this kind of stuff. So I appreciate it.